All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's exciting to be here, and I want to say special thanks to the Seed AI team, Austin and Rachel and Allie have just done a fantastic job. If y'all hadn't had a chance to tour the exhibit below, there's many great sponsors and technology aspects to going through that whole exhibit below, so make sure y'all are checking that out after you finish up the conversation today. But I couldn't be happier than to be on stage here this morning with a fireside discussion entitled Reimagining Preparedness, AI and National Security. Briefly, I want to give a quick overview of our panelists. We have the DHS Undersecretary of Science and Technology, Dmitry Kuznetsov. Prior to joining DHS, he created a new AI office at the Department of Energy and also had a long and distinguished career in academia, including a PhD in theoretical nuclear physics at Princeton. This is important because our next panelist, former Congressman Will Hurd, who many of you know, also had a long and distinguished career at the CIA as a case officer prior to getting elected to Congress in the 23rd District. Full disclosure, I did serve as his chief of staff during that time in Congress, and I have to say he's the only member of Congress that ran a campaign on IT procurement and still won. So, you know, he's got a long, steeped history here.
See, nobody laughed because they're like, why not? Why wouldn't you win on IT procurement? We'll talk about that next session.
That's a great point. But excited to have Will here. He also had one of the few members of Congress that had a computer science degree. But you can see the difference in Congress. Just an undergraduate degree in computer science is necessary. Why? Our DHS Undersecretary has the PhD in theoretical nuclear engineering. So thank you for being here today. So let's jump right in it today. And I will warn you from the outset, of course, it's going to be an interactive conversation, but I'm going to go to the audience, not until the end. I'm going to ask two questions, go to the audience, so please be ready, grab the mic, and we want the questions to come in early from the audience. So let's go and get started. Briefly, I want to give the opportunity, Dmitry, to you first. Quick introductory remarks about what does AI and national security mean to you in the Department of Homeland Security?
First, great to be here. Thank you to Austin, Seed AI, and kind of the intersection with how we innovate in a very complex world today. A couple of words on DHS and what my role is there. The research and development engine at DHS is what I run. It's called Science and Technology Directorate, but it's meant to supply the operational needs today of the 22 different components of DHS. The ones you're likely familiar with are things like Coast Guard, things like Secret Service, it's TSA, ICE, Customs and Border Protection, Citizenship and Immigration Services, Critical Infrastructure Protection with CISA, and FEMA for emergencies, natural disasters, and so on. So it's this broad place of complex missions that affect all of our lives here in this room, where I think about the role of technology, because the only tool we really have today in terms of managing changes around us is surging people into problems. We push lots of people around because we're driven by exigent issues, and consequently, we need something else to balance pushing people as the only opportunity, the only way to mitigate, these things. And so, on preparedness, what does that mean to me? If you give me another minute, preparedness is understanding or thinking about the world around us today. I don't believe that the world of tomorrow is similar to the world of yesterday. If you look at how we manage risk, if you think about airports, if you think about borders, if you think about where we are, is where we are today scalable to where we're going? If you think that yesterday is going to be reflected of tomorrow, I think there are a lot of reasons to believe that is not the case. I bookended with two things. Climate. I like to go to Alaska because it's heating up 4 times faster than anywhere, and the changes there are real. It impacts people. You have to start to ask, what is adaptation? What is resilience? How do we think about a world changing like that? And on the shorter time scales, we have extreme weather. The confluence of events, the fact that we have rare things happening frequently now. And part of my role is to work with first responders around the country. How do you send people into things? What are the tools they need for things that have never happened before? We were just in Maui on Friday deploying new wildfire sensors, but there are things that happen that if smarter sensors, smarter tools, make a difference. So the world is changing around us, and emerging technology, as Austin mentioned in his opening remarks, are exploding around us. Not just AI, it's nano, it's additive manufacturing, it's UAS and autonomy, it's CRISPR-Cas9 and gene editing. It is dozens of things and quantum technologies. And the question is, how do we mix and match to find solutions to the problems that the country faces? And preparedness is hedging against a future that is different than our past, and assuming that the world is likely nonlinear and we can't scale where we are today. So how do we innovate? How do we think differently for problems that we all collectively own? So that's part of this conversation.
Thank you, Dimitri. Really appreciate that overview and look forward to diving into that, into some questions. Will, brief remarks. So, I mean, obviously serving in the agency for nearly a decade and on the Intelligence Committee in Congress, sort of how do you view this issue?
What he said. Look, first off, Austin, thanks, CDAI. I think I was at the first meeting at CAI when it was founded. It was on the curb in Rainey Street, late one evening many years ago. So it's cool to see how this has evolved to be in this great place and having great people come and speak here. Stoney, I'm still pissed off with you for ruining my life. Stoney, gave me the idea to run for Congress and ruined my life with that, and then I ruined his by making him my first chief of staff. Here's how I define AI in a national security context: that we take advantage of it before it takes advantage of us. Right? I think it's that simple, and that we get to a point where that my brother, who sells cable in San Antonio, Texas, is able to see the benefits outweigh the risk of these two things. And so if we get to that point, if we get to that environment, then we've done our job of making sure that we put structures, procedures, processes in place to maximize the benefit and negate as much as possible the negative. The technological change we're going to see in the next 43 years is going to make the last 43 years look like we were a bunch of monkeys playing in the dirt with sticks. And I use 43 specifically because I go back to 1981 with the IBM PC coming on the scene. How much has changed in that time? I'm teaching a class at a university, and I asked the students, do they know what a palm trio is? Like, they've never even heard of it. Yeah, well, I got pictures, right? Like, that was, I thought I was cool walking across Texas A&M's campus with my Palm Trio 600, right? And so if we just look in our lifetimes at how fast this has come, and my fear is that we're not ready for the kind of change that's happening. It's not exponential, it's actually hyperbolic. Two Russian scientists kind of figured out the rate of change in technology. And what does hyperbolic change mean for us? That we can get to infinity. Unlimited resources in a finite period of time. It sounds crazy saying that out loud, but we have to be prepared for that. We're moving too slow, and unfortunately, I think the policy piece, which I think we're going to talk about today, is one of the things that's going to hinder getting to that environment where we can talk about the positives over the negatives.
Excellent. I mean, you were a little ahead of the curve with the Palm Trio. I mean, that was stylish before it was really cool to bring back. So let's jump right into the questions. Dimitri, how can DHS better partner with civil society and the private sector to ensure that we understand what responsible AI means to those you work and serve with?
You know, it's a great question because the challenge I see at DHS, the challenge that I feel, is that we don't have the equivalent of a defense industrial base. We don't have the deep pockets of building aircraft carriers and F-35s and things that are, last decades that support companies. A lot of our needs are boutique. As we work problems in war crimes or child sexual exploitation or fentanyl or pick your problem, a lot of local issues, a lot of regional issues. And there isn't a commercialization path to solve those for big companies. And so we have boutique needs, and we need to appeal to communities, to people who feel the impact to help innovate. We have to think about innovation differently, because there is no go-to company that has all of these things under the hood. And I don't envision there will be, because there is no big market cap for solving a lot of these problems that the nation faces. And so finding new ways to have conversations with different communities to figure out, how do you see about solving your own problems, and how can we help, and how do we partner together? We have to get into that space, and coming here to Seed AI is one of those steps.
Excellent.
If I can
Please.
double down on that, I think why DHS is important in this is because it's the only entity, I think, in the federal government that has the mentality of need to share, right? If you look at all the other entities that are involved in technology, national security, it's need to know. That is never going to change, right? And so I go back to when Mike McCall was running with the legislation of creating CISA. I was proud to be an original co-sponsor, help with that. I might have had an input on the name. What the other alternatives of CISA were a little weird.
It was insightful.
Yeah.
Thank you for setting that up.
And so people didn't think it was going to work. I would say, looking back now several years, I think CISA has been a success, and part of that is that interaction with industry on solving many of these problems. But you mentioned something that I've learned the last couple of years. You talk about the market cap of solving some of the unique challenges we have in the federal space. A lot of these companies aren't looking at that because their investors are saying, how is that going to increase my returns? The sales is not going to be enough in order for me to get a 10x response. And so that's some of the challenges that these young startup companies are having. And that's why articulating a specific need is important to potentially get over those hurdles. But I think DHS is placed because of the uniqueness of the challenges, but also that culture that permeates through the entire building of need to share.
That's great.
Let me also, there is a grassroots nature that's needed for innovation, at least for DHS, because we touch more citizens every day than any other agency, millions of people every day. The place you'll likely interact with us next is down at the Austin airport when you're leaving as you go through TSA, and you might ask yourself, is this the right way, the best way to think of airports of the future? Where do you want us to be? What is the mechanism that you would like for security to ensure that and better flow of people, convenience? What is a model for this? And as you come in from a foreign country and you enter with Customs and Border Protection, how do you think about that? I mean, there are a lot of places that you will interact with us and you will have experiences that might be tailored to your local airports or local first responder interactions where, your personal experiences can help drive that innovation, and we need to somehow cultivate those things to figure out where we need to go.
Excellent. I'm going to do one more question and then go to the audience. So please get ready. The microphone going around the room for anybody that has a question from the audience. So let's talk about AI safety, of course, which is top of mind for many. Will, to you, the best AI systems, untrusted, will undermine the security we seek to provide. What does security mean in a world filled with AI?
I would start with AI has to follow the law. Right? I've been saying that for a long time. People have been critical of me for saying that, but let's not make the same mistake we've made with other technologies. We have I think it's $15 trillion cybersecurity industry, one that I benefited from. I helped build a cybersecurity company, FusionX, that Matt DeVoe ultimately sold to Accenture. But we have that industry because we removed software from the same product liability laws that other products had to have. Now, we're never going back on that, but we should learn from that lesson. We know that social media is driving harms, right? We know that social media is responsible for young girls increasing self-harm because of what they see. Part of that is because of the designs of the system and then the exclusion from the Communication and Decency Act, and that social media companies don't have to follow the same rules that newspapers, television stations, radio stations do, right? So we have those are just two examples. And so let's not make that same mistake, and let's just double down. AI has to follow the law. So if a bank is using artificial intelligence to provide loans, and if the banker misuses the algorithm and discriminates on providing a loan, then the banker and the bank is responsible for that. However, if the banker uses the technology the right way and the AI itself is discriminating, then it's the developers of the AI's responsibility to fix that, right? And we should say that's the start. Now, everybody's gonna be like, that's gonna kill innovation. No, it's not. Like the train has left the building. This stuff is moving so fast. And for someone to try to compete with a big LLM, the amount of compute, the amount of data that you need, this is not going to be competitive. So let's start with that. And people are like, well, Will, shouldn't AI follow the law? Yeah, I think so, but like our laws don't actually necessarily reflect that. And so you're starting to see a bunch of piecemeal kinds of legislation from city councils to state governments passing what AI should and shouldn't do. The second point I would say is when it comes to permitting. If Dimitri and I were like, what the heck, parking in Austin sucks, we're gonna build a parking lot and we buy some land, guess what? We have to get some permits, right? Yeah. To build a parking lot. So if you're developing AI systems that are powerful, and we can debate what powerful is, I would say that we haven't reached the threshold of powerful yet, that it has to go through some kind of process. Maybe it's NIST, to look at, are you red teaming your machine learning models? How are you looking at synthetic data? All those things that we know should be doing. And it should be a tight process. It shouldn't take 2 years. It should be something that should be able to be done in weeks. So I think if we start with those two things, that's how we ensure these tools, people are comfortable with them, and that it prevents some of the broader harms. And then I'll end with this, Stoney. We also, and this is for these people in this room here, right? Like, we need to do a better job of articulating the vision we want to achieve and the vision we don't want to achieve, right? And look, I get in trouble with that. When Rob and Kelly and I were doing the first hearings on AI, we went around like man on the street and asked people questions like, what does AI mean to you? And people would be like, Hal, right? If you were older than me, everybody said Hal, the creepy robot from 2001 with the red eye, right? Or if they were younger than me, they were like Ava, the robot that killed people in Ex Machina. Sorry if you haven't seen it.
You're getting ahead to our movie questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm getting excited.
We got a whole movie section going on.
And so, like, we got to do better than being like, let's prevent Hal from happening and let's prevent robots from killing people, right? Like, and an example I use is in education. The fact that New York City, prevented use of LLMs, now that I know they've gone back on that, is crazy to me. We can have a tutor in our pockets, right? So let's talk about an environment in which a child who's 14 years old can do self-learning. I was lucky. I had parents that helped me with my homework. I had an older brother and sister who helped me with my homework. But, should we have a system in which a 14-year-old kid can pass all the tests and start college? Now, back in my day, and I hope I don't get anybody in trouble or I don't get myself in trouble, like if you got a GED, it was because you were, had to go to juvenile delinquency school or something like that. Should we have an equivalent of, hey, our kid can pass a class and get on to college because they're able to self-learn and move at a certain speed. Like these are the level of details in the environments in which we want to, that we should be articulating where we want to go. And then guess what? With my old colleagues, they don't have PhDs in nuclear physics, right? You got to give them a vision that they can go back to wherever they're from and say, I'm creating a country where we're able to do X. And by doing that, we're gonna have to pass HR 3752, right? Like that's the vision, and there's not enough of that is being done from communities like us so that we talk about where do we wanna go.
And when we do build our parking lot, it should have those autonomous parking devices. And,
Amen. And guess what? I should be able to call Whataburger, and they can drop it with the drone in my, through the sunroof of my car, and it's there when I get done with my meetings.
Fascinating. I love the positive aspects and the impact AI can have, and I know that for Dimitri at DHS, you also have to view that through a lens of sort of some of the threats, right? So sort of how do you approach that at DHS of sort of what guardrails y'all think y'all need in place around AI systems?
Yeah, as I look at it, I worry a lot about the adversarial side. It's not as an abstraction. I think it's a field, unlike cybersecurity, which you can define and you can understand, and we do a lot of triage today for traditional kind of approaches that are getting smarter or kind of sloppy hygiene. Adversarial AI is just open-ended, and it's evolving. We'll see things, on one far end, transnational repression. The way foreign countries will attack citizens, folks here in the US, from China, from Iran, targeting populations. We see it overseas in terms of the disinformation campaigns in native languages that draw people in through the Darien Gap in Panama, promising riches and great opportunities and tickets to Disneyland if you come this way through these treacherous pathways towards the southern border. There are many of these things, many manifestations of tools that are enabling, empowering, multilingual, easy to target, that are causing real issues that are beyond our grasp. And whether, the challenge is the domestic side, as Will articulated well, we can, obey the law. But for some of these things, what do? We see them, how do you respond to them? And they're collections of these things, more specifically just on more tangible things like facial recognition. So we do work in war crimes where people look at some of these horrible videos to understand who it is, to capture a face, to put it on the no-fly list. And we do the same thing with sexual exploitation and trafficking and things like that. And then the question is, can pixel manipulation, can morphing, can other variations come in where the technology will say, even though you've just manipulated a few pixels, so it looks like the same person, but the technology says not on the no-fly list. There are things like that we worry about. So they're real things that impact us today. And then, it's how do we do things better? How do we think about the emerging threats in smart cities and the collections of IoT technologies that we're all sucking in every sector of the economy because they're enabling and empowering? What's the downside? What does it mean when we have layers of smartness and perhaps embedded LLMs somewhere in between there that are part of some larger construct that you can't really monitor whether it's having a hallucination inside because there are other layers of things around it that create some other product? That's where we're going. How do you think about that world? And that's what I worry about. How do we get our head around this space? And how do we train experts? And where are we headed? A lot of great open questions, a place to innovate, a place for thought, but we need communities really, passionate about worrying about this with us.
Just to add on to that, look, the adversarial piece is so fascinating, the ability to manipulate the algorithm. We're never going to get to a place where only you have computer vision doing all this work because the ability to manipulate it. We know how to put a tarp over something and make it look like, hey, this is a tree, rather than being a tank. I could wear a shirt and be like, I'm Stony Burke, to the computer versus me. And so, maybe, right? It depends. It depends who's asking. And then when it comes to the role DHS has, right, on this broader threat, when the Innovative Tower Initiative was put in 2017 with DHS, it was using a number of existing sensors to detect in between our ports of entry. There's thousands of miles of our border where it takes Border Patrol hours or days to respond to a potential threat. But if you have a sensor package that's able to detect a human versus a jackrabbit, DHS has been on the lead in introducing some of those technologies. All of the data that TSA has on screening things, how are we using that to improve how we screen cars coming across our border? Because when you look at the 100,000 people that are dying from fentanyl, it's because fentanyl is coming in through our ports of entry, not being in a backpack in between our ports of entry. So, and I think only 1 out of 5 cars are reviewed at the port of entry. So how do we use these tools in order to address those issues? And then, what barriers does Homeland Security investigations have from using all the data that Border Patrol is collecting on people that are coming into our country illegally in order to dismantle the networks in South and Central America. Homeland Security investigation, that's their task. The NIPIF, the National Intelligence Priority Framework, says that human smuggling is in the role of HSI. They don't have the resources or the manpower, but how are we giving them these new tools that can be used to take all the data that their men and women on the front lines are collecting in order to dismantle those networks? And so the frustration is those technologies exist, but folks like Dimitri need to be given the power in order to introduce those things into their systems and not have to go through a 3-year process and worrying about challenges and things like that. And so the procurement process, again, everything with me always comes back to IT procurement, but we have to be able to deal with that so that the men and women can do their jobs.
Excellent. I want to come back. Go ahead, Dimitri, and then we'll go to the audience.
Will's right on volume. The volume problem at DHS can be staggering. You think about Port of Long Beach, 6 million containers a year come through there. And how do you scan all of those for things? You have to target what you look at. There is no technology that can manage the risk there to try and understand it at the scale you need throughput. For mail, billions of pieces of mail come through our processing facilities at LAX and JFK and so on. And it just keeps streaming in from around the world. And it might have fentanyl in it. It could have other things. Keeping up with the volume, the speed and the precision you need is a great LLM type of model, but in the image space where you can manage risk entirely differently. How do we get into that space? How do we think about pushing how we use data and technology at speed to manage risk at airports and transportation across the board? There are a lot of use cases that we have that are real, that impact us all.
I want a smart dude like that having the tools, right? But if Congress can't get their act together and pass budgets, and if DHS can't plan, have multi-year planning in order to be able to think through those things, then you're wasting the talents of someone like this who understands the problem set, understands the tools that can be applied to it. And so that's a dereliction of duty of those individuals in Washington, D.C.
Yep. Not only do you need the tools, but the power to procure those tools. Let's go to the audience. Questions? Right here. Lauren. This is going to be a tough question. I can tell. This is going to be.
It's for you.
I'll be super easy. So one of the things that DoD is talking a lot about is how they're integrating AI for threat analysis and using more predictive models. Is DHS thinking about that? And how do you guys kind of think about the ways in which we need to be concerned about the hallucination aspect of that and the things that could go wrong when we're using AI for that type of national security preparedness?
First, I like to keep apprised of what DoD is doing, not only because they have more to invest, but the challenge we have at the end of the day, we interact with citizens. And the privacy needs, the First and Fourth Amendment needs to protect, how we monitor, not being able to capture and store information. It's a different world. We have no authorities to detect drones because monitoring the RF frequencies of a drone violates the Wiretap Act, for example. And there are lots of things like that, even where passive monitoring of things you could do in the field overseas, you just can't do here because the law enforcement nature, the interaction with U.S. citizens really requires a different kind of sensitivity where if only, but you can't, and now what do you do? And there's a second piece that any tool set we use that leads to arrests in transnational criminal organizations or things like that has to be discoverable in court. And so tools that might be sensitive, that the intelligence community we'd love to have, we can't disclose. And so even if it exists to do something, we can't touch it unless we try and air gap it in some way that doesn't reveal sensitive technology. So it's an interesting space to be. You have your hands tied behind your back technology-wise, but the sensitivity to the mission and how we secure the homeland is really up front, making sure that first we satisfy that, and now how do you do it?
this broader issue, and I call it pre-crime in an homage to the movie Minority Report, right? Like this predictive analysis. Like, is predictive analysis going to be good? Yes, it's absolutely. Like, why is every ad I'm shown on Instagram something that I want to buy, right? Because they've been able to predict my behavior. And so this notion of, predicting something and concept of pre-crime, that's one of those things that scares me when it comes to this space. But this is one of those issues that academics, ethicists, people that may not be hardcore technologists should be debating this potential issue. I think this is one of those areas that we should tread very lightly into, because of if you make one mistake, the impact that has. But this is one of those areas that a lot of other people can be talking about and coming through with that environment we want to get to without having to understand how it works.
That's an excellent example leading into one of the questions. Both of y'all are very steeped in AI as technologists as well. So what lessons from history should we keep in mind regarding societal adoption of transformative technologies? How do we avoid repeating mistakes?
I have a particular point of view on that, in that I see AI today. My personal take is it is a technology without a science. Not that it doesn't use scientific tools. It doesn't have any deep-rooted foundational theory on which it's all built, like quantum theory or something else. And consequently, you don't know the bounds of what's possible. And the closest analog I think about is the discovery or the work on the steam engine. Around the early 1700s, maybe just at the end of the scientific revolution, to about 1824, when Carnot first developed the rules that tell you about what is the efficiency. There was more than a century of work where it was just a technology. People didn't understand steam. They scaled up without knowing how big you could get. There were steam explosions. You learned, don't do that again. It was very empirical. Many designs without any framework on what are the bounds of performance, what's the biggest this could be, how do you think about this? And without that construct, it was just exploration. And I see AI, in particular the machine learning space today, the deep learning, as that. There are lots of tools, people are experimenting, but there are no bounds, theoretical bounds on what you can or can't do. It has no framework like that. And so it's open-ended, and consequently, we don't know where it's going to go. I think it's hard to enforce particular things we want that are societally relevant, because there is no bounding structure on how to think about that. So, we lived through, historically, a piece like that with steam, which was transformational for the Industrial Revolution. At the end of the day, it wasn't about steam. It was about, industrializing things, and that was eventually replaced by other things. And I think today, it's not about the learning, it's about the convenience. Whether it's something else under the hood, you're not going to care as long as you get the same impact to your lives. And so it might be that down the road, as with steam, maybe it's decades away, there is something else, because it's not that we care about deep learning per se, it's that we like what it's doing for us with the kinds of data today that we ingest.
Doc, thanks for proving my point. That's why we need to get this guy more money to figure out how to adopt all these things. Two things for me. I've been asking a lot of people that were involved in the early days at RSA how encryption became basically a commodity, and how did that get embedded in everything that's happened. How did companies make money on it, right? Like that to me is an example of the introduction of a technology that touched everything. But the first thing I thought of when you asked that question is, I think it was called the Hutchinson's Commission. After World War II, who was he owned Time magazine and all of these. I want to say it's Tom Luce or Tim Luce, something like that. He was like, the media is freaking terrible. Reporters are terrible. They're just shields for all of the companies that are paying their bills. We need to have a commission. And he asked the dude who was the head of, who was the president at University of Chicago, to do this commission. I think it was like 2 years. And they basically was like, hey, there's no there's no standards, right? There's no governing body amongst journalists, and a lot of the things that we've learned, or how we view media and the media ecosystem, were some of the things that were suggested right after World War II in this Hutchinson's Commission, which you can apply to social media, which you can apply to the increase in use of tools because of generative AI being able to have an onslaught of information. And so I think there's some lessons there. And that was something I only recently learned of and have been studying.
Excellent. One more question from the audience, right here.
So Robert Wines, I run the Homeland Security Startup Studio with a company called FedTech. My question has to do with priority, but then also national posture. Essentially, are we taking a more, and it's also, should we be taking a more offensive approach of unleashing the benefits of AI for DHS and its component parts and across the nation? Or are we in a more, I guess, defensive crouch, first dealing with and prioritizing the threats that our adversaries might be using with AI?
So I would say first, we have a great operational use of it today, and it's measured in terms of impact. So, you know, when we do all kinds of seizures through warrants and other things of large data sets, we try and understand transnational criminal organizations and, for example, money laundering, the financial networks. Back in 2019, it used to take about 3 years and 10 experts to piece together a bulk cash money laundering network. We can do that now in days. With child sexual exploitation, a lot of this stuff is dark web. It is streaming. It is not archived anywhere. Transactions that people do are crypto. They're air-gapped, different networks. You can buy whatever you want, but we have tools to try and stream content, you know, monitor content and pull things out. We've had about a 50x this past year improvement in yielding cases by smarter tools plugged into the dark web for this, understanding the background, trying to identify features, where could it be in the world, who's the person, who's the victim. We have millions of images of children, archives of these. And the question is, using AI, you need to age them or de-age them. Are any of these the same person? You know, how do you make those links for archived images for things, you know, that have been happening over the years? And there are a lot of places already that we deploy these tools. We measure progress in terms of number of kids rescued every year. We've had many dozens last year, number of arrests, number of life sentences. And so the measures are real today. We track those, and it's making a difference. It's just that it's not well advertised, but it is embedded into what we're doing. And hopefully at the airports too, you'll see some of that with a touchless entry now, depending on the airline, which is nice. You don't have to show ID, you just walk in front and enter. And soon, hopefully with screening and so on of baggage, that'll also change. But yeah, there are a lot of places already. I mentioned the wildfire sensors, you know, where for first responder use, smarter networks of sensors that understand particulate matters in different ways. So, you know, the ones in Maui have to be sensitive to volcanic ash and other ambient issues and things that trade winds bring in that is different to deployments in Colorado and California, Arizona, and so forth. So there are a lot of places where we already are doing things. It's just that we're not always out there. We're so operational, it doesn't quite get out there that it's under the hood, but we need a lot more because the mission is just, you know, massive.
I can't say it could be more offensive or defensive. And again, in 2015, holding the first hearing on AI and writing the first national strategy, like this is like old news now. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's involved in it. I have been shocked at the level of conversations. Hawley and his DIM partner.
Coons.
No, not Coons. They did the hearing.
Or Blumenthal.
Blumenthal. Yeah, the Hawley and Blumenthal hearing on this. I was like, man, there was like some good questions. I I probably shouldn't say this, stop the recording on this. Like, I never watched a hearing before, right? And sitting there and watching it, like, it was interesting conversation. So I think we're going the right direction. Let's deal with some of the structural parts of government, budgets, and multi-year budgets, so people can start implementing these things. I think that's where the rubber needs to meet the road.
Awesome. Last question. South by is also a movie festival, so we got to hear favorite sci-fi movie.
I've always been kind of fond of Army of Darkness.
Army of Darkness.
Fifth Element too, but
That's a good one.
Deep cut.
That's a deep cut. Well, so on AI, I remember, I would do all this talking about AI and HAL 9000 from Space Odyssey 2001, and I forced my wonderful wife, who's in the back of the room, to watch Space Odyssey 2001. It is the weirdest movie. The first 12 minutes of it is like these dudes in ape costumes being like doing monkey sounds, like for the first 12 minutes, and she's like, I thought this was supposed to be about AI, right? And so we never finished it. But one that I've enjoyed recently. It's a series, not a movie. Altered Carbon.
Oh yeah.
It's with my man Falcon from all the Anthony Mackie. And what's fascinating about this, and I'm not giving anything away, we have gotten to the point where we can upload our consciousness into the cloud. The cloud's still open in this future technology.
Always open.
It's always open. And then your body becomes a sleeve, right? So you can inject your mind in any kind of sleeve. Now, rich folks have the money to be able to do this. Poor folks, if you die, you're screwed. You're dead because you don't have the money to pay your cloud bill, right? Or to have the extra sleeve. And what's fascinating, it talks about issues of like transfer of wealth. If you should care about transfer of wealth over thousands a year, should you think about it over 80 years? And so it's super dystopian, but it provides a number of ideas that are interesting. One I keep getting asked about. Sorry,
We're gonna move to the movie panel next.
Everybody keeps the WALL-E has come up like literally 9 times in the last 7 days. Well, like everybody's like, have you watched WALL-E? I'm like, yeah, I've watched WALL-E, but like, why are you bringing it up to me? Yeah. And so that's when we got it, babe. That's what we're gonna do tonight when we go to sleep.
All right, well, I'm getting the hook, so I hope everybody today, not only did you get AI insights, you got some stuff for the queue, so I hope everybody has a great South by. Thank you to the audience for participating. Dimitri, Will, thank y'all so much for a very insightful panel today. Thank y'all.